You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, Thursday, October 30th, 2025. It's Halloween Eve. Everybody excited to get to it? Everybody, hopefully you got your candy ready, got your costumes ready, whatever sort of festivities you're ready to be involved in tomorrow night. I hope you have a great and safe time doing it, unless you're at GOB Actual, who doesn't let his children go out for it. But I'm not going to give him too hard of a time for that, because it is, after all, a satanic, demonic holiday. What are we going to be talking about today on the AmRad Pod? Because today it's Halloween week. We got to get lots of scary stuff involved. We're going to be talking about true threats. So as a reminder, before we get started, want to make sure you have followed the channel here on rumble.com/AmRadPod. Give us a nice thumbs up. If you're following us over on YouTube, The American Radicals Podcast, also give us a nice thumbs up there. Try to expand the brand out to a different platform. If you watch us on X at X America News, give us a nice share. If you listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, 5-star rating, 5-star review. Again, as always, trying to expand out and radicalize more Americans on this hobbyist podcast, a hobbyist podcast in which your humble host at Real Steve Friend is just here as an American citizen expressing his First Amendment right to comment on open source information, the current events of the day, giving me a unique perspective, try to be a little bit humorous, lighthearted, maybe hard-hitting, but definitely under no circumstances am I representing any particular arm, department, agency, or bureau of the federal government of the United States of America. So what is in store today? We're talking about true threats. Well, there were some threats against the Attorney General of the United States, and in true AmRad fashion, I read into it, and I will give you an assessment. A discussion about nihilistic violent extremism. The new threat on the horizon is being spoken about in different political circles, including all the way to the top of the preeminent premier law enforcement agency of the United States. Antifa has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization, no longer domestic. It is an FTO. Turning Points USA for the left, perhaps. We're going to share a unique opinion piece from a friend of mine, Andrea Gomez, who has been on the show before, way back a couple of years ago. She wrote a nice piece about that organization to sort of pull back the curtain on a, quote, nonpartisan educational group, which is anything but. Joe Biden's the auto pen. We have some more revelations about that. There's a battle over DEI. It is continuing. The Department of War is laying off problematic employees, actually employees who are just not doing anything. Bill Gates under fire and course corrects for his opinions on the sun monster, and update on the Arctic frost investigation. So lots of threats all across the landscape. We're going to get into those in a moment. But before we do, let's thank the underwriting sponsor, affiliate for the day on the American Radicals Podcast, which we don't make any money off of. We just like to promote local businesses, as we're wont to do on this. And we're going to acknowledge the M-Clip company, m-clip.com, m-clip.com. This is an American company made in Georgia. It's family owned. These are money clips, luxury goods. They look really sleek, lifetime guarantee. They've been in business for over 20 years because of that, because these products last, because if you gunk it up, you send it to them, they'll fix it to you at no cost. And you can get your initials monogrammed on them. You get a nice little metallic look. If you like baseball, we are in the World Series. And if you have your favorite team, you can get that put onto your money clip. Or if you like the suspendables and you want to rock our emblem and our logo, you can put on the suspendable badge and our logo, all of it at m-clip.com is available to you, 10% discount if you use our promo code, which is suspendable, SUSPENDABLE. And there you can have some money left over to put in your money clip. So when you get lots of compliments, make sure you put the 5 on the outside. Those, after all, are the big bills. So I teased at the beginning, we want to get to the threats, the true threats that exist. And I use that term true threat because it will come into play on our first story of the day, which involves some threats against the Attorney General of the United States of America. And this came to my attention. There was some posts on X about it, and there was also some news stories to follow up. But let me throw up what the actual charging document looked like. And I did read through it all. So for those unaware, this is what one of the pages of the criminal complaint that went out against this particular subject who made some online threats against the Attorney General. And I think his name, our bad guy, his name is Avalos, but not really a big and important deal here. He uses a online moniker Wacko. But for those who are not watching over on Rumble or on YouTube and just listening, there's a couple of screenshots about what this individual put out on TikTok, and it's described in the charging affidavit. It's a threatening post with a photograph of U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi with a sniper scope red dot on AG Bondi's forehead, and the caption reads, "Wanted, Pam Bondi, reward $45,000, dead or alive, preferably dead." Additionally, the suspect user posted a comment below the depiction that reads, "Cough, cough, when they don't serve us, then what?" And then they also like to note how this individual does not put their name on anything, and it has a huge followership. It looks like 79 followers on this massive TikTok account. So his name online is Wacko, but the charging document notes that he spells the name Wacko in a unique way where the A in the WACKO, the A is actually an anarchist A. And that is very important because if you go further along in the charging documents, they note how an anarchist frequently asked question book pinned to his page, according to open source research as well, based on the affiants, who's the special agent for the FBI's training and experience. Anarchism is a political philosophy and a movement that seeks to abolish all institutions that perpetuate authority, coercion, or hierarchy, primarily targeting the state and capitalism. Before we get too deep in it, I do need to issue this statement. That's not illegal. You can be an anarchist in America. I read through the excellent charging document in its entirety. That is the sum total of the threats against the Attorney General. Now, I'll assess whether or not that's a true threat, but on its face, anarchism is an ideology that doesn't like government. I'm not saying it's completely a Venn diagram that is a complete circle with the people who tossed tea into the harbor 200 plus years ago. But maybe if you lined us all up ideologically, the anarchists are not next to those guys, but a couple of down the line. And I think the term anarchy has probably been co-opted by a bunch of leftist communists who really want to have total control. But again, not illegal, as long as you're not engaging in unlawful activity, which brings us back to the threats against the Attorney General. But I think it's also worth throwing up, the anarchy symbol is so problematic that right now, currently, you can go to Amazon.com and get a nice throw pillow with the anarchist A. I think it'll cost you about $22. I guess for being against capitalism, they do know how to earn a buck or two. But thinking back to where these threats are, this image that was put up with the red dot, the sniper dot on the forehead of Pam Bondi, wanted, dead, or alive, for there actually to be a true threat against an individual, there has to be imminence. You have to be capable. You have to have the jeopardy, like it's going to happen, like the finger is just about to be on the trigger, or at least have that in the very near future. And I went to an old case that at GOB Actual, Garrett Boyle and I have discussed before, but it's worth as a refresher as we're assessing the true threat nature of this threat to assassinate the Attorney General of the United States. And that was Watts versus United States of America, 1969. And if you look at this, it says at the very outset that petitioner here, whose name is Watts, made some remarks during a political debate at a small public gathering, maybe almost like a digital public gathering with 79 followers, just spitballing. that if Watts was inducted into the Army because the draft was in place for Vietnam, which he vowed would never occur, and made to carry a rifle, Watts uttered, quote, "The first man I want to get in my sights is LBJ." The Supreme Court in this case held that that was crude political hyperbole in light of its context and conditional nature, did not constitute knowing and willful threats against the president of the United States, where you would think the threshold to go after somebody, the president's a little bit higher up than the attorney general. I mean, they're both high principles within the executive branch of government, but I think the president's far more prominent. But if that didn't constitute a true threat against an elected official, what did this constitute? And I think the game is given away if you go back to the charging document that was used here, because having read through it in the hopes that there was something else, surely I was missing it. I actually read through the 6 pages that were the charging document, which, unless you're working on Indian country where you could do a page and a half charging document because it's essentially like a violent crimes detective for a city, you don't need that many details. Most FBI complex investigations would be in the double-digit number of pages for a charging document. That didn't happen here. I do want to note, though, a couple of details. So the tip came in through NTOC, which is the 911 center for the FBI out in West Virginia. They get phone calls and email tips in. And the tip came in on October 9th. Well, it's now October 30th, so it was a few weeks ago. If there was an imminent threat against the Attorney General, was immediate action taken? Well, no, they arrested the individual on October 27th, 18 days later. 2.5 weeks went by. So I guess there was no plan afoot to immediately offer $45,000 for the assassination of the Attorney General of the United States. I mean, let's be honest, the playbook was available to the FBI to run here. Right? The playbook where we find a vulnerable person and we groom them with a confidential human source, introduce them to an undercover, and encourage them to do their worst ideas for the exact amount of money that they have in their bank account. And when they finally agree to do the worst thing, then we arrest them for doing a terrorism. Was a confidential human source introduced? 2.5 weeks is more than enough time, particularly if you're using the online features, to just poke and prod, maybe get a subpoena, find out how much money that this individual wacko has in his bank account. Does he even have $45,000 to offer? And then you find out and say, hey, I saw your post. I'd be interested in discussing it further. That would be a way that the playbook, the complex investigations that the FBI likes to do, would be carried forward. Did they do that? Well, that certainly wasn't annotated within the charging document. It seems like they just spent all their time tracking down whose account it was and then going and arresting a person for, on its face, First Amendment protected activity. And also the affiant on this charging document. His name is Caleb Jurgensen. Now, Caleb describes himself in the opening, as you're supposed to do. It's the "I love me some me" paragraph, where you say how much experience and training and expertise you have in this, so you are an authority on it. Judge, trust me, this is a bad person. We need to go and arrest them. Now, Caleb has been with the FBI since June 2024, so a year and a half. So Caleb's still on probation. So the FBI had a threat come into the NTOC intake center and gave it to the new guy because it was a legitimate threat to the Attorney General of the United States. You would want the rookie on that one. It's a true threat after all. Or maybe it's just an opportunity. It's an opportunity for Caleb to check off a couple things off his new agent logbook. Hey, did you draft a charging document? Did you swear it out in front of the judge? Did you get an arrest? Because maybe Caleb works on a national security space and doesn't have the opportunity to put handcuffs on anybody for a while. And also, Caleb's on probation. You can be fired for any reason. What do you mean you have a problem with bringing this case? Maybe you're just not bureau material. So you can see how this was an opportunity. They got the headlines and they can claim over at the FBI how they're defending America, protecting our principles within the government, when really, on its face, there was no actual true threat, which to me is the true threat. When you have a government apparatus with the ability to take away your freedom or potentially your life because you said things that they found obnoxious or threatening, because that is one of the most dangerous words. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to threats. It's like extremism. I mean, Steve Friend is a pretty extreme guy. Went out today, ran my miles, got my pounding on my ankles, made sure I took my trueearth.co black turmeric so my ankles don't hurt. That's a pretty extreme thing to do. Same thing when it comes to threats. It's like the discussion we had a few episodes back with the FEMA operator who said, well, if we felt that there was a threat, then we didn't have to go to the house to offer them aid. It could be hostile. Well, define hostile. It's this gray area that is the threat and allows these government apparatuses to enhance their power, to view the American people as not their customers, the people who they're duty bound to protect against fraud and force and to protect their civil rights and civil liberties and to focus on due process. No, you're an opportunity for us to get some headlines, maybe go back to Congress and say, we need additional funding, check off some logbook items to progress in our careers. That's the threat. But they're hoping that you don't pay attention. They're hoping that you're not watching this hobbyist podcast as we dig into these details. And, before I get to the next one, I'm thinking about the idea of threats. And as I was considering that this morning, one of my favorite internet memes, being a father of two, is it pertains to threats. There's this picture, and I found it actually. And again, for those who are not watching, or I'll have to describe it. It's of a father throwing a small child into the air, which is fun to do when they're young because they weigh basically nothing and they think you're Superman. And if you look, there's 3 individual pictures of the exact same dad tossing the exact same kid, but because it's photoshopped, it's an idea of perspective, and then it's an idea of threat. So on the left, it's as the father sees it, and it's the kid going up about 18 inches in the air. As the child sees it, the child thinks he's going 4 or 5 feet up in the air. And as mom sees it, 20 to 30 feet in the air, because she thinks that their precious child is always at risk. Threats are an issue of perspective. There's a lot of subjectivity there. Okay, now, nihilistic violent extremism. This is a new idea on the threat landscape, and we've talked about it before on the American Radicals podcast, but I do think it's worth going back into, because there was a interesting piece that came out of the Free Press, and it concerns the Los Angeles fires, because they've now out there investigated and determined who the individual was that started. And this resulted in billions of dollars of damage. It was the beginning of 2025. So the piece that I found over at Free Press, headline, "The Suspected LA Arsonist and the Rise of the Nihilistic Violent Extremists." There's a fun other word again, extremists, not illegal. Now, the individual in Los Angeles, his name is Jonathan Rinderknecht. That's a funny name. He was defined more by what he was against: climate change, Donald Trump, people who ate meat, people who believed in God. So he's a communist, street animal leftist. But according to the Free Press, those ideologies were not really what motivated him. It was his nihilistic, violent extremism. So, like others accused of being part of the latest cycle of political violence, our bad guy here, Rinderknecht, belonged to this new category, what the FBI called NVE, nihilistic violent extremism. They have a vaguely construed politics that mostly veers left, but is shot through with contradictions. Well, I mean, nobody could ever say that a leftist has had an ideology that doesn't have conflicting ideas. ID to vote, racist. ID to get GNC whey protein powder, required, right? I mean, that's stuff we point out all the time here. And if this was certainly a violent activity to set ablaze Los Angeles because you don't like Donald Trump or people who like to eat cows, there's a political ideology there. But nihilistic violent extremism means you don't really have an ideology, which makes extremism even more vague, because define extreme and define not having an ideology. And in the gray is really where we see the actual threat, because when there is no definite meaning of a term, It's open to interpretation. It can be categorized to just go after who you want. Now, the current FBI director spoke to nihilistic violent extremism relatively recently. I think it was about a month ago, and from the Senate Judiciary hearing. Here's Kash Patel. And he discusses NVEs. Give this one a play.
Currently, we have 3,500 international terrorism investigations. Specifically, we have in this country 1,700 domestic terrorism investigations, a large chunk of which are nihilistic violent extremism, NVE. Those who engage in violent acts motivated by a deep hatred of society, whatever that justification they seem is. The FBI has seen a 300% increase in cases opened this year alone versus the same time last year. In the last couple of months, the FBI secured a guilty plea for a man in Tennessee who attacked an energy facility with drones and explosives. We secured the indictment of a violent Sinaloa cartel faction leader in Chicago on narco-terrorism charges. Our folks in Sacramento collaborated with domestic and international partners to secure a guilty plea for a leader of a transnational terrorist organization who solicited the murder of federal officials.
All right, pause it there. He's kind of all over the map on the various threats there. I do think it's interesting how Director Patel mentioned the terrorist in Nashville, Tennessee. That's Skylar Philippi. We've covered down on him where we talked about the playbook. For those who might be new to the AMRAD pod, welcome aboard. Let's radicalize you to what actually goes on there. In the case of Skylar Philippi, he was introduced to 2 confidential human sources because he had this really great idea to attack in a YMCA and conduct a mass shooting, which is not a federal crime. And the appropriate thing would have been to report that to the Nashville Police Department so they could take corrective action if they saw fit. But because the FBI saw Skylar as an opportunity, they introduced multiple confidential human sources, and then 3 undercovers got Skylar Philippi intoxicated, and then to change his plan. And his plan went from conducting a mass shooting at a YMCA in Nashville to flying a 3D printed drone carrying multiple pounds of C4 that he didn't have access to or the ability to build into an electrical substation in suburban Nashville, and thus bringing down the electrical grid for the continental United States of America for the low, low price of $150. And why did these confidential human sources and undercover assets, employees of the FBI, why were they able to elicit this motivation for this guy? Because he said it was the Jews, which was racially motivated violent extremism, ergo it's an FBI case. That's a playbook sort of case, but not really what we're talking about with the nihilistic violent extremism. This is the new term du jour. We now have 2 terms, 2 words in the exact phrase, in the category, the characterization of a terrorist in allusion to a terrorist. They don't actually say terrorist. Nihilistic, no ideology, which is conflicting with terrorism, which is driven by an ideology. And extremism, which again, not illegal. Steve Friend does run very far, seems kind of extreme. But that creates the gray. That creates the threat, a threat of an agency or even an entire arm of the federal government to have enhanced power, enhanced capabilities to go after those that they deem to be problematic because they can fit you in that very broad category and then use all the little mechanisms in order to bring about the results that they want, be it because you're a low intelligence, vulnerable person, or because you said something that they find offensive and they're able to construe it as a threat to a principle within the government. Now, nihilistic violent extremism is kind of new and kind of lesser known. I think Antifa is something, though, that many are aware of, particularly on the political right, who remember 2020 when there were prosecutable cases of sieges of government installations, particularly like in Seattle and Portland, where there were FBI assets on the ground who were documenting what went on and building cases. And yet somehow there was no prosecutions afterwards. But Antifa has now been categorized as a foreign terrorist organization, reporting from NPR. Headline: as Trump talks of designated Antifa a foreign terrorist group, experts see danger. I love the editorializing that goes on with these news pieces. Antifa is purposefully not capitalized with the capital A, indicating that NPR does not view it as an organization, a proper noun. Whereas if they describe somebody's race as black, they'll capitalize the B. So when you read these, you see they give away where their political leanings are very easily, just even in grammatical decisions within the printing. But to this article, Donald Trump has already issued an executive order that labels Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. But the impact of that is unclear, and this is true. There is no actual list of domestic terrorist organizations. And here is the executive order that we brought up a couple weeks back that designates Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. But now, if we're going to push it over to the foreign terrorist organization list that the State Department has the ability to list out, there are some problems attached to that, and there are some downstream consequences that will be a threat to you, even if you are not sympathetic to where Antifa is ideologically, and I'll get to that. Now, Christopher Wray testified to Congress 5 years ago that Antifa wasn't a group, but was an ideology, which again is a conflicting leftist idea because having the ideology is what motivates terrorism. So did he kind of say it was a terrorist group? But again, conflicting ideologies within leftists like Christopher Wray are legion. Now, if the Trump administration does designate Antifa a FTO, foreign terrorist organization, the reverberations would likely be huge, starting with the ability of federal prosecutors to bring criminal charges of material support. That's the big one. If you can ever get somebody for material support, providing material support to terrorism, that's essentially a career case in the FBI. That's what they're always going after because money is very powerful. Money isn't just speech. It's screaming because if there's organizations and you're able to starve them of the resources to carry out violent activities to bring about the political change through fear and political unrest, then you can essentially choke off these terrorist organizations. So there is an actual objectively good reason to go after providing material support to a terrorist. Now, material support is broadly defined. It can mean anything from financially, you send them a check, sell them some money, or you can do educational support and training. You could send material. It could be weapons, could be food. I mean, it's pretty broad how you define material support, which gets you into a little bit of trouble. And as NPR decries in this, if you were to designate Antifa as a foreign terrorist organization, that would bring a lot of pressure on like social media companies to not platform Antifa groups, so they wouldn't be able to collectively gather and organize because Facebook's not going to allow ISIS on there and they're not going to allow Antifa on there. They're going to have some pressure from the federal government to avoid that. But I wanted to connect this to another Supreme Court. We talked about Watts versus United States. There's an old one, a lesser known one that is within our lifetime. It's from 2010. And I want to connect it to this Antifa as a foreign terrorist organization case or decision because of the problems here that could create additional threats. It's not just that Antifa itself is a threat, but we're setting and establishing a precedent which inevitably will be used against you if you are of the political right. Now, the case I'm talking about is called Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project. And I promise, guys, I will not get too nerdy with the SCOTUS stuff, but this is important. So let's bring it up and read a little bit from this decision, which John Roberts, currently the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, he issued the decision, and Antonin Scalia signed on for it. So not a good decision, I think, at the end of it, because there is a lot of wiggle room in it that creates gray space, which creates threats. So the premise of this case began 1998. It took 12 years to get to the Supreme Court. This is how long and drawn out these processes are. Now, the plaintiffs here filed a federal lawsuit. They challenged the constitutionality of material support to terrorism. They claim that they wish to provide support and humanitarian aid to political activities of these groups that were deemed to be foreign terrorist groups. Now, the contention that they should interpret material support statute would apply to speech to require proof that a defendant intended to further a foreign terrorist organization's illegal activity. What does that mean? That's lawyer speak. Let's break it down for the regular folks here. Providing material support. The question became, yes, it's pretty clear if you're sending money to a terrorist group, money is fungible. Even if you're saying, well, I'm sending them money so they can buy food for the needy because they have a charitable arm. ISIS also has an outreach where they try to educate the youth. No, because they can take that money that they were going to spend on educating the youth and then they're just going to buy more rockets with it. So that's pretty cut and dry. The federal government is clear on, you're sending money over there, sending material over there. You're just loosening up the resources from another pocket to go and do the terrorist things. But speech is something entirely different. Training is something entirely different. I mean, if you want to go over and give them training on weapon systems, yeah, that's going to lead to some violent action. I could see that connection. But what if you actually go over to an ISIS and you say, hey, look, I want to train CPR. Well, could it be used on a battlefield, or could it be used because somebody just has a medical emergency? Is that providing material support? What if you want to do some training on political organizing so a group can bring about change within their country without using violence? You say, hey, look, I like where you are ideologically. I dislike the violence. Let me train you on how to get a petition out there, how to organize a group to go and redress your grievances against your elected officials, how to get out the vote in the next election, how you can learn about how democracy works. Does that training constitute material support? So you see there's a lot of gray area. What if you just want to espouse the beliefs that a particular group that has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization, what if you just say, hey, look, I kind of like where these guys stand on this particular thing, even if you abhor violence, and you say, I like, though, that, in the case of ISIS, that they want to bring about a global jihad. But what if on the American Radicals podcast, at Real Steve Friend, and we're in the area of fiction here for those who are my minders over at the Security Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But what if theoretically Steve Friend got up here and said that I support a global caliphate? Would ISIS pay for that? Well, probably. I represent an American who has somewhat of a public face. Now, I don't take any money, but there's a monetary value for that. Is that providing material support? Now, that wasn't specifically addressed in the Supreme Court decision, but they kind of, by not addressing it, did address it. And the general takeaway from this case, which again is the Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project, Eric Holder being the Attorney General in 2010, was that is, yes, providing material support through training or even speaking out on behalf of an ideology could be construed that way. Now, how is this a problem? Well, we're using this in context of ISIS, which, if you're viewing us here, I don't think you have sympathies for. And if you're viewing us here on the AMRAD pod, you likely don't have sympathies for Antifa. But it will be used when we have a president, American psycho, Gavin Newsom, for something that you maybe do have sympathies for, like Turning Points USA. How many people within the sound of my voice are supporters of that organization, which goes out and doesn't engage in violence, but it goes out onto campuses and tries to educate the youth and teach them what their political perspectives are. They try to engage in honest debate and flesh out ideas in a peaceful way. But the political left in this country says that speech is violence. It's creating a hostile environment. They're extremists who want to deport all the illegals. That's dangerous. That's a threat. We have extremism. We have a threat. And do you think for 2 seconds that at these gatherings of 40, 50, 60,000 people that Turning Points USA is able to get out there, that there's not at least one crazy person? Like, I've done probably 50 to 60 speeches in the last few years, go out to groups as small as a couple dozen people to have been in front of a couple thousand people. And I think without any deviation, at every event I've ever attended and had an opportunity to do a meet and greet, shake some hands before and after I go and deliver my remarks, there has been at least one crazy person who's come up to me. And it's clear that people who are, I would characterize, vulnerable, maybe in some emotional disturbance, psychological disturbance, those people seek out community. They'll glom onto an ideology which they might not completely understand, but they just want to have a support structure around them. Now, if I'm able to encounter that in a group of 30 or 40 or 50 people, how many of those people exist at a Turning Points USA event? How many of those people would be vulnerable to a playbook? And then we can say that they're actually a true threat. They're an extremist. And because we can connect them to a Turning Points USA, have you donated to Turning Points USA? Do you support their mission and ideology? Are you going out there and wearing their gear? Are you liking what they're doing on social media? Are you speaking about how they're doing the Lord's work? Could that be construed as material support to terrorism under a President American psycho who designates a TPUSA as a domestic terrorist organization? I don't think I'm looking too far into some sort of dystopian future. I think that's entirely plausible. And that is the true threat. All right, let's get off of this and talk about some education stuff for a minute. I want to make sure I plug my friend Andrea Gomez's recent piece, because we were just talking about Turning Points USA. There's this group right now that purports to be a nonpartisan educational group, but Andrea did a really good job of exposing how that's a complete canard. She wrote it over at Town Hall, which loves the pop-up, so I just have a screenshot of it. And I will read the headline for individuals who are listening, not viewing us over on Rumble or YouTube. Rumble is rumble.com/amradpod. YouTube is the American Radicals Podcast. Headline: The Left's Hidden Youth Activism Machine. Andrea Gomez just put this out 2 days ago, October 28th, 2025. And she talks about this group, which is called the Young People's Alliance. Kind of innocuous, kind of vague, wouldn't necessarily ascribe any sort of political ideology to it. Now, Young People's Alliance, YPA, claims to educate and empower young Americans to engage in civic life. All good things, all good things. But if you read into where they really stand on most of these issues, YPA supports zoning reforms that replace single-family neighborhoods with multi-unit dwellings, so 15-minute cities. YPA advocates for sweeping federal oversight of digital platforms, controlling First Amendment speech. And they also push for restrictions on manipulative corporate practices. So I don't know, that's again innocuous, but could be construed as anti-business. So they're of the political left, but they present themselves as nonpartisan and focused on youth issues. In practice, its messaging frequently blends social justice themes with partisan narratives. They get their funding from the Archwell Foundation, which is Harry and Meghan Markle, and they're all about gender equity and what they characterize as refugee support, illegal aliens. And then the Susan Crown Exchange, which is all about social and emotional learning, which Andrea is very well versed on. When she was our guest, she sort of spoke to that, but just 30-second review of it. Social emotional learning is data mining on kids and saying, well, we're going to get them not just in the academic sense, but we're going to assess where they are at psychologically and emotionally. But really, we're going to find out about them so we can characterize them as kind of crazy. And then we can restrict their ability to get a firearm and restrict the ability of anybody in their families to hold firearms. So this is this group, just for your awareness, called Young People's Alliance. And again, I'll throw up the screen capture. Comes over from Town Hall, my friend Andrea Gomez. Give it a read. Give her some clicks so they can ask her to write again. She's an excellent writer. It is The Left's Hidden Youth Activism Machine. It came out 2 days ago on townhall.com. All right. And now we can pivot over to some DEI matters, because it never will go away. Let's start off with a video, though, because did you know that if you are of a similar complexion and immutable characteristic. I was reliably informed by somebody who said the content of character was the most important thing, actually. But if you are actually pale, like at Real Steve Friend, you have to be a racist. It's inherent in you because of the inherent qualities and tan of your skin. So here's a nice Karen. Let's get us started on a discussion about DEI. These are the 5 things that prove that white people are racist.
Think you're one of the good white people? Here are 5 things you still say that are actually racist. Number 1, my family didn't own anybody. My family didn't enslave anyone. A lot of white families didn't, but we still benefit from it. Even today, white families hold 8 times the wealth that black families do, and this is no coincidence. Number 2, I voted for Obama. Okay, congratulations. Racism didn't end in 2008, simply shapeshifted. Also, if you haven't noticed, we literally have a fascist in office right now. Number 3, not to play devil's advocate, but what? There is quite literally no reason to defend racism in any way, shape, or form, so just completely eliminate this from your vocabulary. Number 4, but black on black crime. This is a distraction so that you do not focus on systemic violence. Do you know why the first police patrol was founded? To literally capture black people and drag them back to their kidnappers and their oppressors. So yes, we still see the effects of that today. And number 5, why can't we all just get along? I used to think this phrase was neutral, but realize it is an attempt to silence black voices and to protect white comfort. We can't all get along because the system is inherently corrupt. As white people, we can either get defensive or we can hold ourselves accountable. Peace and love.
Peace and love from one of the worst people on earth.
Classic awful. AWFL, affluent white female liberals. They're a scourge.
They're a scourge indeed. Let's talk about DEI. I have a piece from the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness. Is it from Washington Post? Because that would be delicious. Yes, the WAPO. And there's a discussion about the battle over DEI. And it's fun to read because WAPO is in favor of DEI and they're crying about how there's been all of these changes. But from the other perspective, being somebody that believes that DEI is fundamentally evil, not just misguided, it's actively evil. It's fun to read because it's a little bit like how the WAPOs and the New York Times of the world and the NPRs are talking about deporting illegal aliens. And they're like, can you believe they're deporting these illegals? And everybody who voted for it through democracy, democratically elected a president who said, I'm going to deport all the illegals, is saying, yes, why don't you do more of it? But I wanted to read it from that perspective to highlight some of the good stuff that's gone on with rolling back DEI, because WAPO decries it. But just as a nice precursor for my position on DEI, DEI is fundamentally and objectively an evil premise, because when you prioritize immutable characteristics, as that nice Karen did there, it said that if you're white, you're the problem always because reasons, and saying the word literally improperly 2 or 3 times in 45 seconds, you are prioritizing immutable characteristics which will necessarily cause whatever you're trying to achieve with your organization to suffer. So let's just use an example. Let's use my good friend Garrett's merch store, which we should probably plug. So the-suspendables.com, guys. Go to the-suspendables.com. Don't forget the dash, or you go to a hockey website. You can support at GOB Actual, where he's putting out some nice merch with the Suspendables line on there. But let's use Garrett's merch store as an example. Let's say that Garrett stands up the store. It starts doing really well because all the American Radicals podcast members and audience go to the website and they tell their friends who tell their friends, and they buy lots of merch. And now Garrett is just flying high, living the capitalist dream. And a couple years down the line, he's got multiple brick and mortar locations. He's got a robust website. He's got factories that are producing this. And somehow, in light of all this, Garrett comes to the realization that all of his employees putting out an outstanding product, which everybody loves and there's no complaints on, he realizes that they're all Aleutian Islander lesbian little people. They just happen to be the people that are making the great t-shirts. And then Garrett looks around and says, you know what we need in here? We need people that look different. So he starts to fire some of the Aleutian Islander lesbian little people and hire some, I don't know, Tasmanian 6'8", Two-Spirits. And the Tasmanian 6'8" Two-Spirits, by definition, are not going to do as good a job as the Aleutian Islander lesbian Little People, because he's been hiring the people that were best at the job. And as a result of that, the t-shirts will suffer. He is sacrificing the product that the people want, need, and desire, are willing to trade their hard-earned money for in order to achieve some sort of on its face diversity. So this is a idea and a concept that is designed to hurt the organizations that implement it. Now, to this piece from the Washington Post. The headline is, "The battle over DEI is messier than ever for companies," and I'm here for it. From WAPO. The Trump administration's move to end what it called illegal DEI. Illegal is in quotations because, again, they give away the editorial in this facts that they're presented because democracy dies in darkness. So the Trump administration's move to end what it called illegal DEI within 48 hours of taking office in January raised the stakes for employers, prompting many of them to jettison representation goals. So they're no longer saying we have to have a certain number of Black people or a certain number of gay people or a certain number of women. And they're just hiring people who do the job the best. And they are doing that for not just their own companies, but for their suppliers, because that was the initiative that was launched under the Biden administration. If you were, let's say, in the business of creating suspendables merch, then you not only had to hire the appropriate percentage of people who were gay or Black or women, but you also had to buy your merchandise from wholesalers, the fabric and the printing stickers. Those had to come from suppliers who also had those percentages. So those have gone away. Employers have been reassessing their DEI programs since the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action. Affirmative action was used by universities that said that if you're Black, you get into our school, and if you're white, it's too bad for you. And if you're Asian, it's really bad for you. Now, lawsuits challenging employer DEI policies, including those filed by non-minorities, have been creeping up because there was this other initiative that said that if you were not a, quote, minority, then you had to meet a higher bar if you were treated unfairly. So if you were a white man and you were treated unfairly because you were a white man, you had to meet a higher threshold than if you were a woman or if you were a racial minority. That's gone away because we now exist in an area where content of character matters, and it's supposed to be equal justice for all under the law. Now, in July, DOJ released guidance outlining how it planned to apply federal anti-discrimination laws to programs. It includes targeting employers who use proxies for protected characteristics. So proxies for protected characteristics would be like if you have an application and instead of saying, hey, are you tan? Do you like to have sex with people who have the same genitals as you? Like, that's pretty explicit. But if you ask things about lived experience or cultural competence, those are all codes for are you a minority? And now that's being challenged by the Department of Justice. Objectively good thing. Now, there's a woman here that is quoted. Her name is Femily Howe. She's a gender inclusion advisor in Silicon Valley, which is a professional useless person. She felt a pretty sudden shift after the 2024 election because she's finding out that all these corporate entities that were requesting her to come in and teach them about how they could be more inclusive about gender matters, they're not asking her to come out anymore. And they're saying that their DEI got shut down and they're not sure how to use her anymore. So now the professional useless person is going to have to find herself useful in some other industry, or she's going to have to get onto SNAP benefits, which will expire in a single day. All right. And that's personnel matters. So let's stay on personnel matters away from DEI, but just generally ineffective people like this Femily Howe, somebody who's probably going to have performance issues. There apparently are a lot of them over at the Department of War. So this is another piece from the Washington Post that is dealing with the Department of War and identifying problematic people. And I think that that's probably a threat to national security. Is allowing those people to collect a paycheck and to walk around the halls of the Pentagon. But because it's a WAPO, they see it as a threat the other way. They want to load lots of people in there who stand up against Secretary Hegseth and the Trump administration for reasons. But the headline is Pentagon moves to fire civilian personnel with speed and conviction. The Pentagon removed key protections for defense civilian workers and directed that managers fire employees with unacceptable performance reviews. So if you are not good at your job, now it's easier to fire you. Well, that's a good thing. The memo warns that managers will also be held accountable. So if they don't fire people who are having bad performance, then those managers will be punished. So if you're not a good manager, you're having poor performance yourself. By not assessing your underlings and subordinates' poor performance, you'll be removed. Also a good thing. Managers previously had to provide employees with detailed feedback and specific objectives of how to improve, like a performance improvement plan, a PIP in the FBI, as it's referred to. But now they don't have to do that. There's a new policy, and those plans for improvement are not required. They can just say, you're bad at your job, you got to go. And the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, is very sad about it because they view this as a threat to people just collecting a paycheck. Whereas I think most people with common sense and don't have conflicting ideas in their head, like a communist leftist, would conclude that, hey, there's people who are working within the Department of War who are not good at their job. And the Department of War is kind of an important thing. I mean, not an anarchist, but maybe you're just a small government person. You are in favor of the country defending its borders, projecting strength in some military fashion, having the ability to break things and kill people so that other countries don't come over here and take our stuff. I think that's probably what you're in favor of. And if there are people who are incompetent at that, walking around, that's a threat to your ability to have your stuff not get taken and have your life not be snuffed out by an aggressive nation who's a rival of our own. All right, let's pivot over now. I've got a couple of congressional matters that we need to bring up. The first one being the auto pen and the threat that was for 4 years. The auto pen, which still head scratcher, how in the age of having PDF abilities to just insert signatures, we pay in the area of what, $40, $50, $60,000 for a mechanical arm that duplicates the president's signature. And also, why is the president having to sign so many documents that he can't just carve out a couple minutes of his day? There's not that many laws, that many executive orders. And if there are, that's a problem. That's a threat. That's an executive who's far too energetic and is far too powerful. All of these are threats. But let's talk about the auto pen. So this is a CNN piece, which is reporting about the Oversight Committee run by James Comer, who loves to use taxpayer dollars to hold televised hearings and gather facts, which he then has ghost written into a book, which you can purchase using the information that your taxpayer dollars got. But, don't never let transparency and accountability get in the way of a nice grift. This is from CNN. Headline, GOP-led Oversight Committee says Biden pardons signed by AutoPen are void in its final report. This is a 93-page report. Man, I hope there's a strongly worded letter attached to it. But this report, if it is actually brought into some level of action from the Department of Justice, would be a good thing. I won't hold my breath, but the details are interesting nonetheless. 93 pages. It outlined that the Oversight Committee concluded after its months-long investigation into Joe Biden's use of the auto pen, it alleged that the committee found a cover-up of the president's cognitive decline, which we all saw, and no record demonstrating President Biden himself made all the executive decisions that were attributed to him. The committee deems void President Biden's executive actions that were signed using the auto pen, all of them. And they are referring this over to Pam Bondi at the Department of Justice. So we'll see if she's too worried about getting assassinated by somebody's TikTok account with 79 followers, or if she's actually going to follow up on what went on here. And I failed to throw up the actual CNN article. Sorry about that, guys. That was the Washington Post one I had. This is the CNN article. GOP-led Oversight Committee says Biden pardons signed by AutoPen are void in its final report. But there's also an adjoining piece that I found over from the Heritage Foundation, the Oversight Project. And they did an in-depth study of the auto pen, what they were able to gain access to. Now, this is from itsyourgov.org, which is the Oversight Project. And the headline here is the AutoPen Presidency Part 4. They've done multiple part series on this. This is a comprehensive summary of all of the learnings that they were able to ascertain. So they reviewed over at the Oversight Project over 1,500 copies of documents with Joe Biden's signature. They found that 88% of the documents, excluding laws like executive orders, pardons, communications, proclamations, they were signed with an auto pen. I don't know what other documents those would have been, but 88%. 82% of all auto pen signed executive orders, pardons, commutations, and proclamations, those are what the Oversight Committee are saying are void. They were signed while Biden was in Washington, D.C. So 4 out of 5 documents that were executive orders, pardons or commutations, and proclamations, 4 out of 5 of them, almost 700 out of 850, those were signed by an auto pen, even though the president was in Washington, D.C. and available to sign it. So what was he doing instead of signing? Was he just napping or eating pudding? There were also 4 different signatures from the auto pen, 4 very verifiably different signatures that were attributed to Joe Biden, even though it was a mechanical arm that was supposed to be duplicating the same signature. Did they keep having Joe Biden update his signature? How did that happen? And 3 out of 4 of the pardons for, including Anthony Fauci and Mark Milley, members of the Biden family and former members of the House January 6th Select Committee, those were signed with the auto pen. So if, in effect, the Oversight Committee run by James Comer, who's probably working on his next book, issued this report and it is actually taken up and adjudicated in court, and it will have to be by the Department of Justice, if those signatures are actually void, and I'm not holding my breath that even if they do bring some sort of a claim in court, I think that that's really a leap. But if they were to do that and they were to triumph, the Anthony Fauci's of the world, the Hunter Bidens of the world, the Benny Thompsons, all of those pardons would be gone. That's a good thing. That should be a threat to those individuals, and I'm here for it. All right, we've got 2 more to get to here. Before we get to the big one, I know everybody's talking about it. I'm not going to spend a ton of time in the Arctic frost stuff. I want to talk about some Bill Gates because this one is funny. Again, never let principle get in the way of a nice grift. This is a piece from the Washington Examiner. The headline is that the Senate probes the tax-exempt status of the Gates Foundation and a couple other different foundations. Now, again, very much like the Mark Milleys and the Anthony Fauci's and the Hunter Bidens, who could be at threat of prosecution should those pardons be ruled and deemed null and void, Bill Gates might be at threat here. Now, Chuck Grassley over at the Senate Judiciary Committee is investigating the Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, and citing some reports from Washington Examiner. And it looks like all 3 of those groups, and here specifically the Gates Foundation, have been providing funds to the Chinese government and other Chinese state-run universities, and also funding the China Belt and Road Strategy. The Belt and Road Strategy being where China puts money into these countries, which gives them access to them, to their rare earth minerals. They're basically using the promise of infrastructure building in these third world countries in order to gain access and influence and gobble up their resources. The Gates Foundation directed $11 million into various arms of the Chinese Communist Party, $2 million to a rail company that the Pentagon says is part of China's military, and an additional $6.7 million to Chinese state-run universities in 2023 alone. All of those came in 2023. So Bill Gates should feel a little bit at risk, and I've got a couple of videos from him because he's a jerk, and I want to show how maybe he could be course correcting and pivoting his declared perspectives on matters, because Bill Gates is is a population control enthusiast, or at least he has been historically. He's big on making sure that we inject people with lots of experimental vaccines so they can't have babies, and we can control the population of the earth because of the Eva sun monster is angry at you for driving your SUV. But I think Bill Gates is smart enough to see that the political winds have shifted and he might be changing his public perspective on things. So historically, this is where Bill Gates stands on what we need to do for population and carbon.
To zero. This equation has four factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3.
I just want to focus on that one component where he's doing the just high school algebra. In order to get to zero, one of these numbers has to get close to zero. And the first thing he goes to is population, because at the time that he gave this nice TED talk, there were roughly 6.7 billion people on Earth. But if we do a really good job with life-saving things like vaccines, as he's reliably assured us, and birth control, then we could bring our population down by 10 to 15%, which would mean that Bill Gates is on stage on an internationally televised address saying that he's in favor of eliminating 1 billion people on Earth. So he's on record, at least. That's where he stands on things. But now he could be under a little bit of scrutiny. So Bill Gates, who's really worried about the sun monster and your SUV, so you need to stop eating meat because of all that carbon in the air, eat the bugs. We need to cut at least 1 billion people out of the equation. You know, maybe he just, I think he might have erred in judgment. Nice recent news report about Bill Gates.
Right, Matt, thank you very much. Developing this morning, a new controversy erupting on the far left. One of the most vocal climate change activists now says we need to forget focusing on green energy and stop investing in expensive and questionable efforts for, quote, zero carbon emissions. In an essay, billionaire Bill Gates argues climate change is not going to wipe out humanity and says all the money that was spent to try and get rid of fossil fuels has essentially been wasted.
I think Bill Gates sees that there's a threat at his door right now to his political perspective. And he's going to play really nice because he wants to have a future where he will come find himself back in a situation of a president American psycho, and he'll shift back to his true ideology, which is in favor of eliminating over 1 billion people on Earth. He'll play nice for now. That's the threat. That's somebody who's willing to play possum temporarily. Do not take his word for it. He is not seeing the light. He's not coming around to any sort of a biblical worldview on this. All right, let's finish up and let's hit this Arctic frost thing real quick. I know it's been discussed ad nauseum by lots of individuals out there, but we would be derelict in our duty as a hobbyist podcast with a unique perspective on matters of federal law enforcement, national security, without issuing some sort of commentary here. So here's the image that was just recently produced out there that's led to all the discussions about the expansive Arctic frost investigation headed by Jack Smith and some of the details about it. So there were some new disclosures from the House Judiciary Committee. Arctic frost investigators used FBI field offices across the country. They requested over $16,000 to travel to conduct more than 40 interviews. There was a total of 45 senior Trump allies, and that included Steve Bannon, Jeff Clark, Scott Perry, as well as dozens of other lawmakers, lawyers, potentially under active investigation. This was an expansive investigation, basically, of anybody who was affiliated with Donald Trump or purported to be a conservative or a Republican there. But that's in and of itself a giant threat. But I think the true threat is given away by this document here. And again, if you're listening to us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, give us a nice 5-star rating and review. But, I'll have to describe it for you. This document is from the Arctic Frost case. It was turned over to the Judiciary Committee. It's an electronic communication, and it lists off some of the approvals who came down the line of this, because this was within the knowledge of dozens of individuals, of the executives in the FBI and the Department of Justice. And they do list off Tim Thibault and Paula Bate, former deputy director, and as well as Stephen D'Antuono, who was the assistant director in charge of the Washington field office. They list those names off, but they have 6 names blacked out because those are still employees. This is one of the threats. Those people are still working for the FBI. Why are we protecting their identities? I've got nothing more on that. Why are we protecting the identities of people who did this, who were just good Germans at best, at worst were politically inclined and willing to use the apparatus at their fingertips against people who they disagree with politically? Why are we protecting their identities? Oh, and the other threat, sorry, this isn't your mama's show. This is your daddy's show, and I give you the straight dope. This was legal. This wasn't illegal. These were subpoenas. These were eventually getting to search warrants that were signed by a judge. And don't give me this crap about Judge Boasberg. And we need to impeach him. He's never getting impeached. He's a federal judge with a lifetime appointment. And anything he signs, a good German over at the FBI who has his name blacked out in all these documents is just going to say, well, it's signed by a judge. I'm going to go along with it. Because we need total personnel warfare. All of these people removed, and they need to be exposed. Now, you're not going to hold them criminally liable or accountable because what they did was legal. It's not appropriate. You're supposed to have fidelity to the Constitution, bravery to stand up when everybody else is saying you have to do this. You have to just follow orders, to say, no, that's wrong. And you have to have some integrity. But that's not what exists right now. They just followed orders. And true accountability needs to be in the fashion of transparency of who they are. And then we need to take the opportunity to shut this down. This capability cannot exist. That is the greatest threat. The greatest threat is that this attack dog has sharp teeth. There's an opportunity cost going on right now. While we're doing the nice 93-page reports about the auto pen, which is interesting, and we will see if the Department of Justice takes it up and wants to consider whether or not they can flesh out over a number of years, of course, whether or not a pardon to Hunter Biden, who's just a crack addict, if that is null and void, or if we take the opportunity now to take these very sharp teeth out of this attack dog, so that it can't be turned back around. So that in 4 years, if you've ever donated $10 to Turning Points USA, you can't be considered to have provided material support to terrorism, because in the eyes of the good Germans over at the Department of Justice and at the FBI, they're doing some pretty extreme things over there. That could be threatening. Let's see if we can jam that square peg in that round hole and go after our political enemies. And then just as a final note here, I do have a video, and this just is a bee in my bonnet because I'm a big believer in being truthful and honest. This is another revelation about Arctic Frost, about tapping senators' phones. Spoiler, they didn't tap phones.
Whole year because Ted may destroy evidence and tamper with witnesses. That is BS. I hope somebody will look at that.
And just one tweak, the judge didn't say I may destroy evidence. The judge signed an order that says the court finds reasonable grounds to believe that such disclosure will result in destruction of or tampering with evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, and serious jeopardy to the investigation. And that is utterly without basis in fact. There was no evidence to support that. If the prosecutor made that representation, the prosecutor perjured himself. Amen. And I'd bet $20 this judge cranked out an order like that for every single senator down up here. We just happen to have mine, but it's boilerplate. If you're a Republican, you're on the enemies list, I find that you will destroy evidence. And so we're going to let the executive surveil you without Congress ever knowing about it.
They've been weighed and measured and found wanting, but it was legal. The threat exists and it continues to exist. It's within the power of the Ted Cruz's. And like I said, he shared that video on his social media, on his X account, on his official senatorial X account. And he said that they tapped his phone. That's not what they did. They got a trap and trace. They saw incoming and outgoing numbers. They weren't actually listening to the phone call conversations. That would require a T3 search warrant and 24-hour monitoring of it. That didn't happen. But again, a wiretap or a trap and trace, those are all lawful. That's the threat. Now, we're in the midst of a government shutdown. If they're truly interested in accountability, I believe it's within the purview of the Republican-controlled House, the power of the purse strings, and the Republican majority Senate to hold back the funding for these fundamentally broken organizations that use the powers at their fingertips to weaponize the system against their perceived political enemies because they thought that they were threats. And that is the threat. So true accountability would be pulling back the dollars. Now, is Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson, everybody there you saw, are they prepared to do that? I don't know. Haven't seen it. But if they really recognize the true threat now, even if it is for selfish reasons, I would be in favor of them taking it to that level, to starve out this attack dog so that it can never be turned around on anybody. That's the only way that you can confront a true threat. Do not let this opportunity go to waste. All right. We do have a palate cleanse for the day, and I've got a double dose of the biblical worldview because I'm extra missing Garrett. So I'll only give it to you first, and then we'll get to the palate cleanse. So from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. That's just dealing with fighting against what the real threats are out there. And then from Proverbs chapter 24, verse 17, don't rejoice when your enemies fall. Don't be happy when they stumble. And that one's tough because the evil people that did some of the worst things that we've discussed today, it's really, really hard not to have some schadenfreude should they ever face their comeuppance. Now, that's not saying that we're not rooting for justice. I want face paint on, and I want a foam finger for Team Justice. I'm going to root for it. But ultimately, the justice is not mine. That belongs to the system. And retribution is something that we should probably avoid if we want to make sure that we maintain our own souls and not lose them like those who are willing to weaponize the system to go after those who they don't like. All right, our palate cleanse. It's a brief one. It's a short one. I showed that other video of the Karen who told you that you're racist if you were pale. And this is another Karen who saw another threat, which I believe is in the form of vegetation.
What are you doing?
This is a dangerous plant.
That's a baby cactus.
Do you have a permit for this?
I don't need one. Hey,
you know what? I'm gonna just confiscate it.
Stop.
You totally pricked
No,
me.
I didn't.
I don't know why. I just liked it, and it queued me up because she, again, probably represents one of the worst people on earth.
Classic awful. AWFL, affluent white female liberals. They're a scourge.
Affluent white female liberals will be the only ones who are angry at baby cactuses and say you need regulations for them. All right, that's going to do it for us today on the AMRAD pod, guys. If you haven't already, make sure you give us a nice thumbs up over on Rumble and on the YouTube, which is the American Radicals podcast. And if you aren't over on YouTube, just head on over there and subscribe so we can just get that channel going up there. It's the newest version that we have out in all the different platforms. If you listen to us over on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, 5-star review, 5-star rating. We will be back with you for a Saturday show, a Saturday grab bag show, 10:30 Eastern time across all platforms. And until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amrad.